It was Adolf Hitler who coined a propaganda technique he called the big lie, arguing that people may be more likely to believe colossal untruths because they would not believe that others would have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. So in the big lie, there's always a certain force of credibility. The book Eat Right for Your Type makes the astounding claim that people with different blood types should eat different foods. Type O's are supposed to be like Hunter and eat a lot of meat, whereas people with type A blood are supposed to eat less. In one of the world's most prestigious nutrition journals, a systematic review of the evidence supporting blood-type diets was published. They didn't find any. Diets based on the ABO blood group system have been promoted over the past decade, but the evidence to support the effectiveness of such diets had evidently not been previously assessed in the scientific literature. Actually, in the Journal of the Norwegian Medical Association, there were a number of papers that came out of a day-long scientific seminar held by the Norwegian Society for Nutrition. Hard to believe they'd even take the time, but evidently 40,000 copies of the book have been sold in Norway, and so good for them. They sought to determine blood-type diets, visionary science or nonsense, and they concluded nonsense. What was so outrageous is that the blood-type diet is promoted and justified in the book by supposed scientific arguments, yet the author takes no pains to prove his ideas, just presenting them simply as facts, taking advantage of people's ignorance of biology. His arguments sound scientific, and he uses lots of big words, but displays a fundamental misunderstanding of the science, describing the book's understanding of some basic tenets of blood-type biology as absurd. There should be no doubt that had the author practiced in Norway as opposed to Connecticut, he would be in violation of the so-called quack law. The book cites the work of blood-type biochemists, but if you actually ask the actual experts, as scientists, they say, obviously you have to keep an open mind, but not so open your brains fall out. It must be stated that an open mind should not extend to some of the non-scientific literature where there are books on the ABO blood type system of pure fantasy. The most recent and incredulous of these claims individuals of each ABO blood type must subscribe to a particular diet. I don't know how researchers have the patience to read these popular press books, but it can lead to an appreciation of the ridiculous aspects of the many ignorant and preposterous claims. So what should the overall assessment of this work be? The nicest thing you can say about the book is, well, it does have a good imagination. Is it any worse than people who believe their fate is determined by the stars, though? Well, yes, because astrologists aren't telling a third of the population to go out and eat organ meats. The diet is not as bad as some. Positive results reported by some individuals may well be due to a general improvement in health, in diet and lifestyle, less fat and sugar, more fruits and vegetables, less smoking, more exercise. Look, anything that gets people to eat fewer donuts. Right? But though this may get lost a bit in translation, professor of laboratory medicine at the Norwegian University of Sciences analysis concluded that the author's learning must be considered junk and without scientific foundation. What did the new review find? They sifted through over 1,000 papers that might shed some light on the issue, and none of the studies showed an association between blood-type diets and health-related outcomes. They conclude there's currently no evidence that an adherence to blood-type diets will provide health benefits, despite the substantial presence and perseverance of blood-type diets within the health industry. The author responded to the review on his website, saying that there's good science behind the blood-type diet, just like there's good science behind Einstein's mathematical calculations, and that if blood-type diets were just tested in the right way, just like Einstein's E equals mc squared, he would be vindicated. Complaining that you don't see any studies on blood types and nutrition because of little interest and available money. He sold over 7 million books. Why doesn't he fund his own studies? That's what the Atkins Corporation did. And the answer is he has. In 1996, he wrote, "I'm beginning the 8th year of a 10-year trial in reproductive cancers using the blood-type diet. By the time I release the results in another 2 years, I expect to make it scientifically demonstrable that the blood-type diet plays a role in cancer remission." OK, so that would be 1998, and the results? Still not released 16 years later. clever tactic, though, saying you're just about to publish, banking that no one would actually follow up. So in his sequel, he said he was currently conducting a 12-week randomized double-blind controlled trial implementing the blood type diet to determine its effects on the outcomes of patients with rheumatoid arthritis. That was 10 years ago. As my Norwegian colleagues bemoaned, it is difficult not to perceive the whole thing as a crass fraud. It sounds like science fiction. A bacteria in a vial of dirt taken from a mysterious island, creating a compound that prolongs life. And not in the traditional medical sense. Thanks to advances in modern medicine, we are living longer, but we're doing it by lengthening the morbidity phase. In other words, we live longer but sicker lives. We used to die here, but thanks to medical intervention, we now die here. So traditional medicine increases the number of old people in bad health. Ideally, though, we'd expand lifespan by slowing aging to delay the onset of deterioration. And that's what this appears to do. They called it rapamycin, named after Easter Island, known locally as Rapa Nui. It inhibits an enzyme they called TOR, which stands for target of rapamycin, which may be a master determinant of lifespan and aging. The action of TOR has been described as the engine of a speeding car without brakes. Rather than thinking of aging as slowly rusting, a better analogy may be a speeding car that enters the low-speed zone of adulthood and damages itself because it does not and cannot slow down. Why don't living organisms have brakes? Because they've never needed them. In the wild, animals don't live long enough to experience aging. Most die before they even reach adulthood. Just a few centuries ago, life expectancy in London was less than 16 years old. Therefore, living beings need to grow as fast as possible to start reproduction before they die from external causes. The best evolutionary strategy may be to run at full speed, but once we pass the finish line, once we win the race to pass on our genes, we're still careening forward at an unsustainable pace. Thanks to this enzyme, TOR, which in our childhood is an engine of growth, but in adulthood can be thought of as an engine of aging. Nature simply selects for the brightest flame, which in turn casts the darkest shadow. Sometimes, though, in our youth, even in our youth, our bodies need to turn down the heat. When we were evolving, there were no grocery stores. Periodic famine was the norm, and so sometimes even young people had to slow, or they might never even make it to reproductive age. So we did evolve one braking mechanism. The way caloric restriction extends lifespan appears to be mainly through the inhibition of TOR. When food is abundant, TOR activity goes up, prompting the cells in our body to divide. When TOR detects that food is scarce, it shifts the body into conservation mode, slowing down cell division, and kicks in a process called autophagy, from the Greek auto, meaning self, phagy, meaning to eat, autophagy, meaning eating oneself. Our body realizes there isn't much food around and starts rummaging through our cells looking for anything we don't need. Defective proteins, malfunctioning mitochondria, stuff that isn't working anymore, and our body cleans house, clears out all the junk, and recycles it into fuel or new building materials, renewing our cells. So caloric restriction has been heralded as a fountain of youth. The potential health and longevity benefits of such a dietary regimen may be numerous, but symptoms may include dropping our blood pressure too low, loss of libido, menstrual irregularities, infertility, loss of bone, cold sensitivity, loss of strength, slower wound healing, and psychological conditions such as depression, emotional deadening, and irritability. And you walk around starving all the time. There's got to be a better way. Although the beneficial effects of caloric restriction on lifespan and health have been clearly demonstrated, it is difficult to implement such restrictions in our lives. In the classic Minnesota starvation study, many of the volunteers suffered a preoccupation with food, constant hunger, binge eating, lots of emotional, psychological issues. Even researchers who study caloric restriction rarely practice it. There's got to be a better way to suppress the engine of aging enzyme, TOR. That's why researchers were so excited about rapamycin, a drug that inhibits TOR, thinking it could be caloric restriction in a pill. But like any drug, it's got side effects too. There's got to be a better way. The breakthrough came when scientists discovered that the benefits of dietary restriction may be coming not from the restriction of calories, but from the restriction of protein intake. If we look at the first comprehensive comparative meta-analysis of dietary restriction, the proportion of protein intake was more important for life extension via dietary restriction than the degree of caloric restriction. In fact, just reducing protein without any changes in calorie level have been shown to have similar effects as caloric restriction. That's good news, because protein restriction is much less difficult to maintain than dietary restriction, and may be more powerful than dietary restriction because it suppresses both TOR and IGF-1, the two pathways thought responsible for the drastic longevity and health benefits of caloric restriction. And some proteins are worse than others. One amino acid in particular, leucine, appears to exert the greatest effect on TOR. In fact, just cutting down on leucine may be nearly as effective as cutting down on all protein. So where is leucine found? Predominantly animal foods, eggs, dairy, and meat, including chicken and fish, whereas plant foods have much less, fruits, vegetables, grains, and beans. In general, lower leucine levels are only reached by restriction of animal proteins. To reach the leucine intake provided by dairy or meat, we'd have to eat like 9 pounds of cabbage. That's like 4 big heads of lettuce, or 100 apples. These calculations exemplify the extreme differences in leucine amounts provided by a more standard diet in comparison to a plant-based diet. The functional role of leucine in regulating TOR activity may help explain the extraordinary results reported in the Cornell-Oxford China study, since quasi-vegan diets of modest protein content tend to be relatively low in leucine. This may also help explain the longevity of long-lived populations like the Okinawa Japanese, who have about half our mortality rate. The traditional Okinawa diet was only about 10% protein, and practically no cholesterol because they ate almost all plants. Only 1% of their diet was fish. Meat, eggs, and dairy less than 1%, the equivalent of 1 serving of meat a month, 1 egg every 2 months. Their longevity surpassed only by vegetarian Adventists in California, giving them perhaps the highest life expectancy of any formally described population in history. And now we may be a little closer to answering the mystery as to why populations eating plant-based diets live the longest. Recently, the diets of California children ages 2 through 7 were analyzed to determine the cancer and non-cancer health effects from food contaminant exposures. Food may be the primary route of exposure to toxic heavy metals, persistent pollutants, and pesticides. Though foodborne toxic contaminants are a concern for all ages, they are of greatest concern for children, who are disproportionately impacted because they're still developing and have greater intake of food and fluids relative to their weight. Pediatric problems that have been linked to preventable environmental toxin exposures include cancer, asthma, lead poisoning, neurobehavioral disorders, learning and developmental disabilities, and birth defects. But the good news is changing one's diet can change one's exposure. A diet high in fish and animal products, for example, results in greater exposure to persistent pollutants like DDT and dioxins and heavy metals than does a plant-based diet, because these compounds bioaccumulate up the food chain, and plants are at the bottom of the food chain. But this sample of California kids was not eating a plant-based diet, and cancer benchmark levels were exceeded by all 364 children for arsenic, the banned pesticide dieldrin, a metabolite of DDT called DDE, and dioxins. Children exceeded safety levels by a greater margin than adults. This is especially of concern for children because all these compounds are suspected endocrine disruptors and thus may impact normal development. Cancer risk ratios were exceeded by over a factor of 100 for arsenic and dioxins. Which foods were the worst? For preschoolers, the number one food source of arsenic was poultry, though for their parents it was tuna. The number one source of lead was dairy, and for mercury it was seafood. And the number one source of the banned pesticides and dioxins was dairy. They didn't split up the groups by gender, but a similar study in Europe found that men had higher levels of some of these pollutants than women. For example, levels of the banned pesticide chlordane. But women who never breastfed were right up there closer along with men, with the lowest levels found in women who had breastfed more than 12 months. It is therefore likely that the lactation-related reduction in blood pollutant levels partially explains the lower body burdens among women compared to men. So cows can lower their levels by giving some to us, then we pass it along to our children. What non-cancer effects might some of these pollutants have? They can affect the immune system. Studies clearly demonstrate the ability of dioxins and related compounds to have a long-lasting and deleterious effect on immune function. This manifests as increased incidence of respiratory infections, ear infections, cough, and sore throat. At first, most of the data was for during infancy, but now we have follow-up studies showing that the immunosuppressive effects of some of these toxins may persist into early childhood. So we should try to reduce our exposure as much as possible. How do we do that? Because these pollutants accumulate in animal fat, consuming a plant-based diet, decreasing meat, dairy, and fish consumption may reduce exposure for children and adults alike. In 2013, Maryland became the first state to ban the feeding of an arsenic-containing drug to chickens, used to control all the parasites and give their meat an appealing pink color. In 2011, FDA found that the livers of chickens fed this drug had elevated levels of inorganic arsenic, a known human carcinogen. In response, the drug's manufacturer, Pfizer, voluntarily pulled the drug off the U.S. market, although it's still sold overseas, including in places that continue to export chicken back to us. And a similar arsenic-containing drug for use in poultry is still available in the United States. But at least the ban kept Maryland farmers from using stockpiles of the drug. How much arsenic gets into the actual meat, though, not just the internal organs, we didn't know until recently. Researchers at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health coordinated the purchase of chicken breasts at grocery store shelves in 10 cities across the country, and found 70% of samples of chicken meat from poultry producers that didn't prohibit arsenic drugs were contaminated with the cancer-causing form of arsenic at levels that exceeded the safety thresholds originally set by the FDA, that is, before they relented and admitted there's really no safe level of this kind of arsenic. See, when the drug was first approved, scientists believed its organic arsenic base would be excreted unchanged, and organic arsenic is much less dangerous than inorganic arsenic. But guess what appears to convert the drug into the carcinogenic form? Cooking. When chicken meat is cooked, levels of the arsenic-containing drug go down, and levels of carcinogenic arsenic go up, suggesting that the drug may degrade into the cancer-causing inorganic arsenic species during cooking. How much cancer are we talking about? If you estimate that about 3/4 of Americans eat chickens, then the arsenic in that chicken has potentially been causing more than 100 cases of cancer every year. They conclude that eliminating the use of arsenic-containing drugs in chicken and pig production could reduce the burden of arsenic-related diseases in the U.S. population. That's one of the ways arsenic gets into rice. When we feed arsenic to chickens to ping in their flesh, the resulting arsenic-bearing poultry manure is then introduced to the environment, the soil, the water, and then the rice can then suck it up from contaminated soil and be transferred to human beings that don't even eat chicken. We're talking massive environmental contamination from the poultry industry. Nearly 2 million pounds of arsenic has been poured into the environment every year by the chicken industry alone in the United States. And now we're even seeing arsenic in food sweetened with organic brown rice syrup, so there's all these knock-on effects. It reminds me of the arsenic in apple juice story. Although the U.S. made lead and arsenic-based pesticides illegal years ago, they still persist in the soil, so even organic products are not immune. Yes, there's arsenic deposits naturally found in the Earth's crust, and there's other industrial contamination and pesticide use, but arsenic-containing poultry drugs have been deliberately administered to animals intended for human consumption for 70 years. Consequently, exposures resulting from the use of these drugs are far more controllable than our exposures from environmental sources. And the good news is that thanks to a lawsuit from the Center for Food Safety and other consumer groups, 3 out of the 4 arsenic-containing drugs fed to poultry have been officially pulled from the market. Why do food companies sell junk? Because unhealthy commodities are highly profitable, in part because they're low production cost, creating perverse incentives for industries to market and sell more junk. Coca-Cola's net profit margins, for example, are about a quarter of the retail price, making soft drink production, alongside tobacco production, among the most profitable industrial activities in the world. And one of the reasons production costs are so low is that we taxpayers subsidize it. For more than a century, Western governments have invested heavily in lowering the cost of animal products and some basic cash crops, such as sugar. Accordingly, Western diets have shifted over the past century, especially after World War II, to include more animal-sourced foods, meat, poultry, dairy, seafood, and eggs, as well as more sugar and corn syrup. During the same period, however, we have begun to realize that a healthy diet actually requires fewer animal products and empty calories, and more vegetables, fruits, beans, and whole grains. Though redressing this balance is a complex task, requiring not only a shift in agriculture investment and policy, but also changes in social preferences that have developed over decades, in part due to dollar menu meat. Why is chicken so cheap, for example? In the 9 years that followed the passage of the '96 Farm Bill, corn and soy was subsidized below the cost of production to make cheap animal feed. So U.S. taxpayers effectively handed the chicken and pork industry around $10 billion each of taxpayer money. What if we instead subsidized healthy foods or taxed harmful ones? Every dollar spent taxing processed foods or taxing milk would net $2 in healthcare cost savings, and every dollar spent making vegetables cheaper would net $3, and subsidizing whole grains could offer like 1,000% return on our investment, with all the money we would save on paying for Medicare and Medicaid costs. Unfortunately, we can't count on big broccoli. The produce sector lacks the extensive funding that went to create the National Dairy Council, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, National Pork Producers Council, and the American Egg Board. But even if we removed the hundreds of billions of dollars in annual subsidies for animal products, it might not be sufficient to tip the balance in favor of healthier diets. We have created societies in the West that value and consume meat, dairy, poultry, fish, seafood. Over several generations, a particular way of life has been promoted. This has shifted expectations about diet to include large amounts of animal-sourced foods, the concept that a meal centers around some kind of hunk of meat. The idea that animal products should form the basis of our diet has been scientifically debunked, but remains the social aspiration of billions of people around the globe. As we in the West slowly come to accept that our diets and eating habits are not healthy, it is to be hoped that this will change policies not only here, but throughout the world. Asthma is the most common chronic disease in children, and the prevalence is increasing around the world. Despite this, most research dollars are spent on adult chronic diseases. One might ask whether this is because our politicians and senior administrators feel themselves to be more likely to suffer from the latter and ignore allergic diseases because they have their major impact on children and young adults who don't vote. Imagine how much more effort would be put into elucidating causes of a disorder that increased at the same accelerated rate in the middle-aged and elderly. Well, finally, An international study of asthma and allergies in childhood, studying more than 1 million children in nearly 100 countries, making it the most comprehensive survey of these diseases ever undertaken. What did they find? They found a wide variability in the prevalence and severity of asthma, allergies, and eczema. We're talking a 20-fold to 60-fold difference in prevalence of symptoms of asthma, allergic runny nose, and atopic eczema around the world, striking worldwide variations in the prevalence of allergic symptoms. What does it all mean? Well, the large variability suggests a crucial role of some kind of local characteristics determining the differences in prevalence between one place and another. What kind of environmental factors? Like, why does the prevalence of itchy eyes and runny nose range anywhere from 1% in India, for example, up to 45% of kids elsewhere? There are some associations with regional air pollution and smoking rates, but the most significant associations were with diet. Adolescents showed a consistent pattern of decreases in symptoms of wheeze, current and severe allergic rhinoconjunctivitis, and atopic eczema associated with increased consumption of plants. The more their calories and protein came from plant sources, the less allergies they seemed to have. In general, there seems to be an association between an increase in asthma prevalence and decreased consumption of fresh fruits, green vegetables, and other dietary sources of antioxidants, helping to explain why the prevalence of asthma and respiratory symptoms is lower in populations with high intake of foods of plant origin. Intakes of high fat and sodium and low fiber and carbohydrates are linked with asthma, while traditional vegetarian diets are associated with lower rates. For example, if you look closer within India, in a study of more than 100,000 people, those who consume meat, for example, daily or even occasionally, were more likely to report asthma than those who were strictly vegetarian, which meant also avoiding eggs. Eggs have been associated, along with soda, with an increased risk of respiratory symptoms and asthma in school children, whereas consumption of soy foods and fruits were associated with reduced risk of respiratory symptoms. In fact, removing eggs from the diet, along with dairy, may improve lung function in asthmatic children in as little as 8 weeks. So maybe it's a combination of eating less animal foods and more plants. High vegetable intake, for example, has been found protective in children, cutting the odds of allergic asthma in half. And fruit showed a consistent protective association for current and severe wheeze and runny nose in adolescents, and for current and severe asthma, allergies, and eczema for children. But why? I've talked about the endocrine-disrupting industrial pollutants building up in the meat supply that may increase the risk of allergic diseases, but the increase in asthma may be a combination of both a more toxic environment and a more susceptible population. The dietary changes which have occurred over recent years may have led to a reduction in these natural antioxidant defenses, resulting in a shift of the antioxidant status of the whole population and leading to increased susceptibility to oxidant attack and airway inflammation. In adults, for example, the risk of airway hyperreactivity may increase 7-fold among those with the lowest intake of vitamin C from plant foods, while the lowest intake of saturated fats gave a 10-fold protection, presumably because saturated fats have a role in triggering inflammation. The protective effect of plant food may also be mediated through effects on intestinal microflora. It turns out that differences in the indigenous intestinal flora might affect the development and priming of the immune system in early childhood. Kids with allergies, for example, tend to be less likely to harbor lactobacilli, the good bacteria that's found in fermented foods, and also just naturally on fruits and vegetables. And Lactobacillus probiotics may actually help with childhood asthma, which may help explain why children raised on largely organic vegetarian diets may have lower prevalence of allergic reactions. Infants raised in this way tend to have more good lactobacilli in their guts compared to controls, though they were also more likely to have been born naturally, breastfed longer, and not given as many antibiotics. So you really can't tell whether it's the diet until you put it to the test. In the international study of asthma and allergies in childhood of over 1 million kids, a consistent inverse relationship, meaning protective relationship, was seen between prevalence rates of asthma, allergies, and eczema and the intake of plants, starch, grains, and vegetables. If these findings could be generalized, and if the average daily consumption of these foods increased, researchers speculated over a decade ago an important decrease in symptoms prevalence may be achieved. No need to speculate anymore, though. Plans were finally put to the test. Researchers had proposed that by eating less and less fruits and vegetables, this would increase the susceptibility of the population as a whole to potentially harmful inhaled substances by reducing the antioxidant defenses within our lungs. That makes sense. The thin lining of fluid that forms the interface between our lung lining and the external environment is our first line of defense against oxidative damage, which plays an important role in asthma, contributing to airway constriction, contraction, mucus hypersensitivity. Antioxidants protect against oxidative stress, though, so our lung lining contains a range of antioxidants our body makes itself, as well as those obtained from our diet, particularly from fruits and vegetables. In fact, we can even quantify the level of oxidative stress in people by measuring the level of oxidation products in their exhaled breath, which drops as they start eating more fruits and vegetables, then drops further when they combine more plants with less animal foods. So do those with asthma really have lower levels of antioxidants than people without asthma? Compared to healthy controls, subjects with asthma had lower whole blood levels of total carotenoids, and each of the individual plant phytonutrients they measured, cryptoxanthin, lycopene, lutein, alpha-carotene, and beta-carotene, compared to healthy controls. So the accumulating evidence does suggest that diet has an influence on modulating the response of the lung to inhaled allergens and irritants. But wait a second, it's possible that the reduced carotenoid levels in asthma are a result of increased utilization in the presence of excess free radicals, so it's like a chicken or the egg phenomenon, or in cholesterol-free vernacular, which came first, the pea or the pod. We know antioxidant-rich diets have been associated with reduced asthma prevalence. However, direct evidence that altering intake of antioxidant-rich foods actually affects asthma was lacking, until now. There's two ways to test the effects of fruits and vegetables on asthma. Add fruits and vegetables to people's diets and see if their asthma improves, or, like they did here, take asthmatics and remove fruits and vegetables from their diets and see if they get worse. This was the first research group to see if altering the intake of antioxidant-rich foods directly affects asthma outcomes. Placing subjects with asthma on a low antioxidant diet for just a matter of days led to a significant worsening of lung function and asthma control. This finding is highly significant for subjects with asthma, as it indicates that omitting antioxidant-rich foods from the diet for even a short time frame will have a detrimental effect on asthma symptoms. Interestingly, ironically, the low antioxidant diet consumed by the subjects, where they were restricted to 1 serving of fruit and only up to 2 servings of vegetables per day, is typical of Western diets. In other words, the low antioxidant diet they used to worsen people's asthma, to cripple their lung function, was just like the standard American diet. As about half the population usually consumes a diet with an intake of fruit and vegetables equivalent to the study diet or less, it appears likely that this dietary pattern, which must be considered suboptimal for lung health, may be having a significant impact on asthma management, indicating the potential for typical Western dietary patterns to contribute to the worsening of lung function and asthma control within just days. Cutting down fruit and vegetable intake can impair lung function, but does adding fruits and vegetables actually help with asthma? That was the second phase of the study. Asthmatics on the standard American diet in this study had about 40% chance of relapsing into an asthma exacerbation within 3 months, but put them on 7 servings of fruits and vegetables instead of 3, and you can cut their exacerbation rate in half, down to 20%, just with a few fruits and vegetables. This landmark study on manipulating antioxidant intake in asthma found that just a few extra servings of fruits and veggies a day can powerfully reduce asthma exacerbation rates. If it's the antioxidants doing it, why can't we instead just take some antioxidant pills? Because they don't seem to work. Studies using antioxidant supplements on respiratory or allergic diseases have mostly shown no beneficial effects. This discrepancy between studies relating to fruit and vegetable intake compared with those using antioxidant supplements may indicate the importance of the whole food rather than individual components. For example, in the Harvard Nurses Health Study, women who got the most vitamin E from diet appeared to be at half the risk for asthma, which may help explain why nut consumption is associated with significantly lower rates of wheezing, but vitamin E supplements did not appear to help. Men who eat a lot of apples appear to have superior lung function. Same with kids who eat fresh fruit every day, as measured by FEV1, which is basically how much air you can forcibly blow out in 1 second. The more fruit, salad, and green vegetables kids ate, the greater their lung function appeared. Why no data points for more than once daily consumption of salad and veggies? Because so few kids made the cut. They were cautious about concluding which nutrient might be responsible. Yes, there's vitamin C in all three, but there's lots of other antioxidants, for example, so-called vitamin P, polyphenol phytonutrients found in grapes and flax seeds, and beans, berries, broccoli, and apples, citrus, herbs, tea, soy. Turns out they can directly bind to allergenic proteins and render them hypoallergenic, to slip under our body's radar. And if that first line of defense fails, they can inhibit the activation of the allergic response and prevent the ensuing inflammation, and so may not only work for prevention, but for treatment as well. Most of the available evidence is weak, though, in terms of using supplements containing isolated phytonutrients to treat allergic diseases. You could just give people fruits and vegetables to eat, but then you can't do a double-blind study to see if they work better than placebo. So researchers decided to try to use pills containing plant food extracts. It's kind of a middle ground, better than isolated plant chemicals, but not as complete as whole foods, but you can stick them in a capsule for experimental purposes, so you can compare them to sugar pill placebo capsules. The first trial involved giving people extracts of apple skins. I've talked about the big problem they have in Japan with cedar allergy, so apple extract pills were given every day for a few months, starting right before pollen season started. The results were pretty disappointing, maybe a little less sneezing, but didn't seem to help their stuffy noses or itchy eyes. What about a tomato extract? Randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled 8-week trial for perennial allergic rhinitis. This time not for seasonal pollen, but for year-round allergies to things like dust mites. There's lots of drugs out there, but you may have to take them every day, year-round, so how about some tomato pills instead? Significant improvement of total nasal symptom scores, combined sneezing, runny nose, and nasal obstruction were all observed after oral administration of tomato extract for 8 weeks with no apparent adverse effects. Would whole tomatoes work even better? If only researchers would design an experiment directly comparing phytonutrient supplements to actual fruits and vegetables head-to-head against asthma, but such a study had never been done until now. Same amazing study that compared the 7 fruit and vegetable a day diet to 3 fruits and vegetables, then commenced a parallel, randomized, controlled supplementation trial with capsules of tomato extract, which boast the power of 5 tomatoes in 1 little pill. And the study subjects were given 3 pills a day. So who did better? The group that ate 7 servings of actual fruits and vegetables a day, or the group that ate 3 servings a day but also took 15 supposed serving equivalents in pill form? The pills didn't help at all. Improvements in lung function and asthma control were evident only after increased fruit and vegetable intake, which suggests that the whole food interventions are most effective. Most of the supplements and increased fruit and vegetable intake were effective methods for increasing carotenoid concentrations in the bloodstream, but who cares? The clinical improvements, the getting better from disease, was evident only as a result of an increased produce intake, not pill intake. The results provide further evidence that whole food approaches should be used to achieve maximum efficacy of antioxidant interventions. And if this is what just a few more plants can do, what might a whole diet composed of plants accomplish? 20 patients with allergic eczema were placed on a vegetarian diet for 2 months, and their disease scores, covering both objective and subjective signs and symptoms, were cut in half, similar to what you see using one of our most powerful drugs. The drug worked quicker, within about 2 weeks, but since side effects may include kidney failure and cancer, the drug is considered a Class 1 carcinogen, the dietary option may be preferable. But this was no ordinary vegetarian diet. This was an inpatient study using an extremely calorically restricted diet. They're practically half fasting, so we don't know which component was responsible for the therapeutic effect. What about using a more conventional plant-based diet against a different allergic disease, asthma? In Sweden, there was an active health movement that claimed that a vegan diet could improve or cure asthma. Bold claim. So in order to test this, a skeptical group of orthopedic surgeons at the University Hospital followed a series of patients who were treated with a vegan regimen for 1 year. Participants had to be willing to go completely plant-based, and they had to have physician-verified asthma of at least a year's duration that wasn't getting better, or even getting worse, despite the best medical therapies available. They found quite a sick group to follow. 35 patients, long-established, hospital-verified bronchial asthma for an average duration of 12 years. Of the 35 patients, 20 had been admitted to the hospital for acute asthmatic attacks during the last 2 years. Of these, one patient had received acute infusion therapy a total of 23 times during the period, which is like emergency intravenous. Another patient claimed he'd been brought to the hospital 100 times during his disease, and on every occasion had evidently required such treatments. One patient even had a cardiac arrest during an asthma attack and had to be brought back to life on a ventilator. So we're talking some pretty serious cases. They were on up to 8 different asthma medications when they started. They were each on an average of 4.5 drugs, still not getting better. 20 of the 35 were constantly using cortisone, which is one of our most powerful steroids used in severe cases. So basically, fairly advanced cases of the disease, but more severe than the vegan practitioners were used to. Still, how'd they do? 11 could not stick to the diet for a year, but of the 24 that did, 71% reported improvement at 4 months, 92% at 1 year. And these were folks that had not improved at all over the previous year before changing their diet. Concurrently with this improvement, the patients greatly reduced their consumption of medicine. 4 had completely given up their medication altogether, and only 2 weren't able to at least drop their dose. They went from 4.5 drugs down to 1.2, and some were able to get off cortisone. Some said that their improvement was so considerable they felt like they had a new life. One nurse had difficulty at work because most of her coworkers were smokers, but after the year she could withstand the secondhand smoke without getting an attack, as well as tolerating other asthma triggers. Others report the same thing, whereas previously they could only live in a clean environment and felt more or less isolated in their homes, they can now stay out without getting asthma attacks. And it wasn't just subjective improvements. There was a significant improvement in a number of clinical variables, including, most importantly, measures of lung function, vital capacity, forced expiratory volume, as well as physical working capacity, as well as a significant drop in SED rate and IgE, which are allergy-associated antibodies. Bottom line, they started out with 35 patients who had suffered from severe asthma, for an average of 12 years, all receiving long-term medication, 20 including cortisone, were subjected to vegan food for a year, and in almost all cases, medication was withdrawn or drastically reduced. There was a significant decrease in asthma symptoms. Despite the improved lung function tests and lab values, the placebo effect obviously can't be discounted, since there is no blinded control group. But the nice thing about a healthy diet is that there are only good side effects. Right? Their cholesterol significantly improved, their blood pressures got better, they lost 18 pounds. So from a medical standpoint, I figure, why not give it a try? 1 in 8 American women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetimes. There are a number of compounds in plant foods that may protect against breast cancer by a variety of mechanisms. I've talked about the benefits of broccoli and flax seeds and soy foods, but this recent study out of Germany reported something new: evidence for reduced breast cancer risk associated with consumption of sunflower and pumpkin seeds. Sunflower and pumpkin seeds were associated with reduced breast cancer risk, which they initially chalked up to the lignans in the seeds, something else I've talked about, but their lignan lead did not pan out. Maybe it's the phytosterols, then, that are found concentrated in seeds? There's evidence phytosterols may be anti-cancer nutrients that may play a role in reducing breast cancer risks. I thought the phytosterols just lowered cholesterol. What does cancer have to do with cholesterol? Well, increasing evidence demonstrates the role that cholesterol may play in the development and progression of breast cancer. Cancer feeds on cholesterol. Transformed cells take up LDL, so-called bad cholesterol, and is capable of stimulating the growth of human breast cancer cells in a petri dish. See all these little red dots? That's fat that the breast cancer cells are gobbling up. The ability to accumulate fat and cholesterol may enable cancer cells to take advantage of people eating high-fat diets and high cholesterol diets. Increased dietary cholesterol intake may result in increased breast cancer risk, and may at least partially explain the benefit of a low-fat diet on lowering human breast cancer recurrence. Though data has been mixed, the largest study to date found a 17% increased risk in women who had cholesterol over 240 compared to women whose cholesterol was under 160, though they cannot rule out that there may be something else in cholesterol-raising foods that's raising breast cancer risk. Tumors suck up so much cholesterol, though, that LDL has been considered as a vehicle for targeting anti-tumor drugs to cancer cells. Since cancer feeds on cholesterol, maybe we can stuff some chemo into it as like a Trojan horse poison pill. That's probably why people's cholesterol levels drop so low after they get cancer. The tumor is eating it up. In fact, patient survival may be lowest when cholesterol uptake is highest. High LDL receptor content in human breast cancer tissue seems to indicate a poor prognosis, suggesting that breast tumors rich in LDL receptors may grow rapidly in the body. We've known about this for decades. You can tell this is an old study. Back in the 80s, only 1 in 11 American women got it. What does breast cancer do with cholesterol? Here are some of the potential mechanisms by which cholesterol boosts breast cancer growth. Cholesterol is what our body makes estrogen out of. It's packaged into LDL, which we saw appear to increase proliferation of breast cancer cells, decrease patient survival, and is a major component of lipid rafts. Compared with their normal counterparts, cancer cells have higher levels of cholesterol-rich lipid rafts in their plasma membranes, which may be important for cancer cell survival, as well as serve in human cancer development in terms of tumor migration and invasion. Elevated levels of these cholesterol-rich lipid rafts have been found in breast cancer cells, and the thought is that by reducing blood cholesterol levels may disrupt lipid raft formation and thereby inhibit breast cancer development. This suggests cholesterol targeting may be useful as a cancer therapy. Controlled laboratory experiments have shown that phytosterols in seeds and nuts at dietary relevant levels appeared to inhibit the growth of several types of tumor cells, including breast cancer cells, both estrogen receptor negative and estrogen receptor positive cancer. The therapeutic implications are that plant-based diets rich in phytosterols may offer protection against the development of breast cancer. Of course, you can't make a lot of money on pumpkin seeds, so researchers looked at cholesterol-lowering statin drugs. Evaluating the safety of statin drugs for women is particularly difficult, however. Little research has explicitly proceeded from a gender-based perspective. Some petri dish work looked promising, but population studies have shown mixed results. Some studies showed that women on statins had decreased breast cancer risk, some showed increased risk, and most showed no association. But these were all relatively short-term studies. So-called long-term statin use was defined as mostly just like 3 to 5 years. Breast cancer can take decades to grow. The one study that looked at 10 or more years of statin use only included 62 cases. Given the increase in statin use over the past few decades, and the fact that they're commonly prescribed to be taken every day for the rest of your life, the studies published to date have had limited ability to evaluate the impact of long durations of use. And we better figure this out. About 1 in 4 women over 45 in this country are on these drugs. But that was the only data we had until now. Thousands of breast cancer cases included, and long-term statin users, women taking statins for 10 years or more, had more than double the risk of both types of breast cancer, invasive ductal carcinoma and invasive lobular carcinoma. Now, the number one killer of women is heart disease, not breast cancer, so we still need to bring down cholesterol levels, but might there be a way to get the benefits without the risks? Plant-based diets have been shown to lower LDL cholesterol by over 30% within just a couple weeks, equivalent to most of the standard cholesterol-lowering statin drugs without potential side effects such as increased breast cancer risk. In the latest study on dietary patterns and breast cancer risk among women, those eating healthier had only a quarter the odds of breast cancer, whereas less healthy eating was associated with up to nearly 8 times the odds of breast cancer. Included in the unhealthy pattern were deep-fried foods, which have previously been linked to breast cancer, as well as pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, oral and throat cancers, esophageal cancer, and cancer of the voice box. No deep-fried foods? What's a Southern belle to do? Well, instead of deep-frying, how about the traditional Southern diet, characterized by high intakes of cooked greens, beans, legumes, cabbage, sweet potatoes, and cornbread, which may reduce the risk of invasive breast cancer significantly? What about the consumption of deep-fried foods and risk of prostate cancer? We didn't know until now. They found that eating French fries, fried chicken, fried fish, and donuts was associated with about a third greater odds of prostate cancer, and after stratifying for tumor aggressiveness, found even slightly stronger association with more aggressive disease, suggesting that regular intake of deep-fried foods may contribute to progression of prostate cancer as well. What's in fried foods that's so bad for us? Just heating oils that hot can generate potentially carcinogenic compounds, and then known carcinogens such as heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons form when the muscles of chickens and fish are cooked at that temperature. And deep-fried plants can form different chemicals, like acrylamide. I did a video about acrylamide back in 2008, suggesting it's a probable human carcinogen. Since then, a study suggested pregnant women may want to cut back on French fries to protect the growth of their baby's body and brain. And based on a study feeding people a little bag of potato chips every day for a month, it now seems acrylamide may cause inflammation as well, which may explain its purported role in cancer progression. Acrylamide intake has been associated in some studies with endometrial cancer, and ovarian cancer, lung cancer, tied also to kidney cancer and esophageal cancer. But how much cancer risk are we talking about? We didn't know until now. An excess lifetime cancer risk assessment for French fries. They picked on French fries because they comprise by far the greatest percentage contribution of acrylamide to the diets of children. They estimated that at most 1 or 2 boys and girls out of every 10,000 would develop cancer eating French fries that they would otherwise not have gotten if they hadn't eaten French fries. So it's not as bad as eating something like fried fish or fried chicken, but how much is that saying, particularly for female hormonal cancers such as breast cancer? Now, the level of cancer risk associated with French fries in both boys and girls depends on how long and how hot they're fried at. In Europe, the food industry swore that they'd self-regulate and control fry times to decrease acrylamide levels. But they apparently didn't. No subsequent change in acrylamide levels in French fries. Researchers continue to urge that the cooking temperatures should be as low as possible, and the cooking time should be as short as possible, while still maintaining a tasty quality. Wouldn't want to reduce cancer risk too much, it might not taste as good. Blanching the potatoes first reduces acrylamide formation, but potato chip companies complain that not only will it muck with the flavor, but reduce the nutritional properties by leaching away some of the vitamin C. But if we're relying on potato chips to get our vitamin C, acrylamide is probably the least of our worries. In the past 2 years, 6 separate meta-analyses have been published on the relationship between fish consumption and type 2 diabetes. The whole point of a meta-analysis, though, is to compile together the best studies done to date and see what the overall balance of evidence shows. The fact that there are 6 different ones published recently highlights how open the question remains. One thread of consistency, though, was that fish consumers in the United States tended to be at greater risk for diabetes. If you include Europe too, then fish eaters appeared to have a 38% increased risk of diabetes. On a per-serving basis, that comes out to be about 5% increase in risk for every serving of fish one has per week. To put that into perspective, a serving of red meat is associated with a 19% increase in risk, but that's per day. Just one serving of fish a week is 5%, so a serving a day would be like a 35% increase in risk, worse than red meat. But why? Well, fish intake and omega-3 fats may increase type 2 diabetes risk by increasing blood sugar levels, as found in a review of the evidence commissioned by the U.S. government. An increase in blood sugars in diabetics given fish oil. Or maybe because the omega-3s cause oxidative stress. A recent study found that the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas don't appear to work as well in people who eat 2 or more servings of fish a week. Or it may be because of the environmental contaminants that build up in fish. It all started with Agent Orange. We sprayed 20 million gallons of this stuff on Vietnam, and some of it was contaminated with trace amounts of dioxins. Though the Red Cross there estimates 1 million Vietnamese were adversely affected, what about all the servicemen, the U.S. servicemen who were exposed, spraying it across the countryside? Reports started showing up that veterans exposed to Agent Orange appeared to have higher diabetes rates than unexposed veterans, a link that's now officially recognized. These so-called persistent organic pollutants are mainly man-made industrial chemicals, and among the most hazardous compounds ever synthesized. They include dioxins, PCBs, certain chlorine-containing pesticides, all of which are highly resistant to breaking down in the environment. Initially described for their deleterious effect on reproductive function and their ability to cause cancer, there is now a growing body of evidence showing that exposure to these pollutants leads to metabolic diseases such as diabetes. This is a breakthrough that should require our greatest attention. Finding higher diabetes rates among those heavily exposed to toxic pollutants, Agent Orange exposure, chemical plant explosions, living next to a toxic waste dump, or eating fish out of the Great Lakes, that's one thing, but would the same link be found in just a random sample of the general population? Yes, a strong dose-dependent relationship between the levels of these pollutants circulating in people's blood and diabetes. Those with the highest levels of pollutants in their bloodstream had 38 times the odds of diabetes. Interestingly, there was no association between obesity and diabetes among subjects with non-detectable levels of pollutants. In other words, obesity was a risk factor for diabetes only if people had blood concentrations of these pollutants above a certain level. We all know obesity predisposes us to diabetes, but according to this study, only if our bodies are polluted, only perhaps if the fat we're carrying is carrying chemicals. This finding kind of implies that virtually all the risk of diabetes conferred by obesity is attributable to these pollutants, and that obesity might only be a vehicle for such chemicals. Could we be carrying around our own little toxic waste dump on our hips? This possibility is shocking. Now, it's entirely possible that the 6 pollutants they looked at are not themselves causally related to diabetes. Maybe they're just surrogates of exposure to a mixture of chemicals. After all, 90% of these pollutants come from animal foods in the general population. Except for individuals living or working around industrial sites where these chemicals were used or dumped, the most common source of exposure to PCBs is from diet, with foods of animal origin, especially seafood. So the strong relationship they found between certain pollutants and diabetes may just be pointing to other contaminants in animal products. This nationwide study linking industrial toxins and diabetes was published in 2006. Since then, Harvard researchers reported a link between persistent pollutants like hexachlorobenzene and diabetes in their Nurses' Health study. This is supported by an analysis they did of 6 other studies published since 2006 that showed the same thing. They conclude that past accumulation and continued exposure to these persistent pollutants may be a potent risk factor for developing diabetes. Where is hexachlorobenzene found? In a U.S. supermarket survey, salmon and sardines were most heavily tainted with hexachlorobenzene, with salmon the most contaminated food of all. Especially farmed salmon, perhaps the greatest source of dietary pollutants, averaging nearly 10 times the PCB load of wild-caught salmon. But wait a second, since many of these diseases were banned in the 70s, the levels inside people's bodies have been going down, whereas the rates of diabetes have been shooting straight up. So how could pollutant exposures be causing diabetes? This puzzle may be explained by the epidemic of obesity in the U.S. They showed that the association between these toxins and diabetes was much stronger among obese subjects compared to that of lean subjects. As people get fatter, the retention and toxicity of pollutants related to the risk of diabetes may increase. So we're not just exposed eating the fat of other animals. Our own fat can be a continuous source of internal exposure, because these persistent pollutants are slowly but continuously released from our own fat stores into our circulation. And then I'll call them persistent pollutants for nothing. These chemicals have such a long half-life that people consuming regular, even just monthly meals of farmed salmon might not only consume high concentrations of pollutants, but some of these chemicals might take between 50 and 75 years to clear from the body. What about the mercury in fish? Diabetics do seem to have higher mercury levels in their body. Here's the mercury levels in hair samples from healthy people. Here's the levels in patients with diabetes or hypertension. But mercury alone does not seem to increase diabetes risk. It may be the simultaneous exposure to both dioxins and mercury that increases risk. So it should be a concern, it should concern us that the safety limits for dioxins and mercury individually may underestimate the risk when they're consumed together in seafood. And then once we get diabetes, higher pollutant levels may be associated with a higher risk of diabetic complications. So, while the pharmaceutical industry works on coming up with drugs to help mediate the impact of these pollutants, a better strategy might be to not get so polluted in the first place. Unfortunately, because we've so polluted our world, we can't escape exposure completely. We've got to eat something, but some foods are more contaminated than others. Exposure to these pollutants comes primarily from the consumption of animal fat, with the highest levels found in fatty fish like salmon. Farmed Atlantic salmon may be the single largest source of these pollutants, and that's the kind of salmon you most commonly find in supermarkets and restaurants. You hear about advisories warning pregnant women to avoid the consumption of food containing elevated levels of pollutants and mercury, but since these toxins bioaccumulate in the body for many years, restricting the exposure to these pollutants only during pregnancy would not protect the fetus or future generations against the harmful effects of these hazardous chemicals. Not eating walnuts may double our risk of dying from heart disease compared to at least one serving a week. But walnut consumption may only drop our cholesterol levels about 5%. How could we get a 50% drop in cardiac mortality from just a 5% drop in cholesterol? Walnuts must have some other heart-protecting benefits besides just lowering cholesterol, such as improving arterial function. This review found 5 clinical trials analyzing the effect of nut consumption on the ability of our arteries to relax and open normally, considered an excellent barometer of underlying vascular health. Even after controlling for other risk factors, 80% of those with better than average arterial function survived cardiac event-free over the years, whereas 80% of those with below average dilation didn't. And so what effect do nuts have? All 3 studies on walnuts showed an improvement in endothelial function, arterial function, this so-called flow-mediated dilation measured in the arm. The one study on pistachios also found a positive effect, but the one study on hazelnuts was a wash. A subsequent study on hazelnuts, though, did find a significant improvement in arterial function, so the data on hazelnuts is mixed. Whereas 2 subsequent walnut studies, however, confirmed walnuts' benefits. So, 8 studies to date on nuts and brachial artery function, and 7 out of 8 showed a significant improvement in arterial function, 1 showed negligible effect, and none found nuts made things worse. Half of the studies, though, used the added walnuts to replace foods in the diet known to have a negative effect on endothelial function. For example, in this study, walnuts replaced meat and dairy, which have been shown to be detrimental, so no wonder arterial function got better. When you do a study like that, you can't tell if the benefits you're seeing is because you're adding good stuff or getting rid of the bad. And in 3 of the other studies, nuts replaced olive oil, which tends to lead to a worsening of endothelial function, thereby exaggerating the beneficial effects of the walnuts from here to here. But the other 4 studies, like this one, that just added nuts as a snack or with a meal without replacing any specific foods, found nuts significantly improved arterial function. And given their association with longevity, I encourage everyone to eat an ounce of nuts a day, unless, of course, you're allergic. Only about 1% of people report nut allergies, but still, that's a significant downside of nut consumption for millions of Americans. In my video, Eggs versus Cholesterol in Atherosclerosis, I profiled a study showing that smoking more than a pack a day for 10 years bad for your arteries, and combining egg eating and smoking is even worse, thus the effect of eggs and smoking appeared to be additive. But egg yolks alone in non-smokers was associated with artery-clogging plaque buildup nearly 2/3 as bad as smoking. This certainly ruffled some feathers. Yes, eggs are by far the #1 source of cholesterol in the American diet, but letters to the editor like this one protested that dietary cholesterol may have very little impact on blood cholesterol levels, citing this study published in 1971, performed on 8 people. But if you look at dozens of studies, all put together, covering hundreds of study subjects, we find that blood cholesterol concentration is clearly increased by added dietary cholesterol. Here's an extreme example just to illustrate a year in the life of a study subject on and off eggs. First, they take him off eggs, putting him on a cholesterol-free diet, and his cholesterol plummets within just 3 weeks. Then they give him lots of eggs, and he's back in trouble, and stays there until they take the eggs away and put him back on the cholesterol-free diet, and so on and so forth, turning his high blood cholesterol on and off like a light switch made out of eggs. Of course, the only reason we care about our cholesterol levels or how much plaque is building up inside our arteries is because we want to avoid the consequences, like a heart attack. So do eggs increase our risk of cardiovascular disease or not? Here's the latest meta-analysis, the latest compilation of all the best studies on egg consumption and risk of heart disease going back to 1930. When you put them all together, what do we find? Overall, those that ate the most eggs had a 19% increased risk of cardiovascular disease, a 68% increased risk of diabetes, and then once you get diabetes, an 85% increased risk of heart disease. And it didn't take much. Less than a single egg a day was associated with a significantly increased risk of heart disease. Just over half an egg a day increased heart disease risk between 6 and 40%, and the risk of diabetes 29%. They conclude that their findings support the American Heart Association dietary guidelines, which advise restricted egg consumption in adults for preventing cardiometabolic diseases like diabetes, our 7th leading cause of death, and heart disease, killer #1. In reaction to the study that found a similar exponential increase in artery-clogging plaque in smokers and egg eaters, one critic countered that eggs have beneficial effects on vascular endothelium, the inner lining of our arteries, citing this study on egg consumption and endothelial function funded by the American Egg Board. It was done on a group of men and women eating the standard American diet, overweight, normal cholesterol, which is to say extremely high cholesterol, LDL levels twice as high as could be considered optimal. See, it's often not appreciated that the average blood cholesterol level in the United States, the so-called normal level, has actually been abnormal, accelerating heart disease and putting a large fraction of the so-called normal population at a higher risk for coronary heart disease, our #1 killer. If you threw a lit match into a flaming pool of gasoline and saw no real difference in the height of the flames, you can't conclude that throwing lit matches into gasoline is not a fire hazard. But that's what the egg board study concluded. When the addition of eggs didn't make the arterial function worse than it already was, they concluded that short-term egg consumption does not adversely affect endothelial function in healthy adults. The egg board paid for a follow-up using folks who were even worse off, total cholesterol 244. They reported egg consumption had no effects on endothelial function as compared to sausage and cheese, compared to the ingestion of a sausage and cheese breakfast sandwich. Yet instead of sounding the alarm that eating eggs is as bad for arterial function as a McDonald's sausage McMuffin, they conclude egg consumption was found to be non-detrimental to endothelial function, and cholesterol as well. They started out with a life-threatening cholesterol, ended up with a life-threatening cholesterol. Why didn't it get even worse? Because there's a plateau effect. You can basically max out on cholesterol absorption. After a certain level of intake, it's just another match to the fire. If you're already consuming the standard American diet, averaging 400 milligrams of cholesterol daily, even add 2 jumbo eggs to one's diet, and it may already be a lost cause. But in people trying to eat healthy, those same 2 eggs could shoot their cholesterol up 20 points, whereas a fat-free, cholesterol-free egg substitute was beneficial. So not eating eggs lowered cholesterol levels. Not eating eggs improved endothelial function, and that's what these people needed. Their arteries were already hurting. They needed something to bring the fire down, not throw more matches at it. Same with the other egg board study. They were apparently eating so unhealthy, adding eggs couldn't make things much worse, but eating oatmeal instead of eggs made things better, helping to quench the fire. So even the egg board-funded studies both said not eating eggs is better for our arteries, yet that's the study pro-egg industry folks cite to claim beneficial vascular effects. In the beginning, Aristotle defined 2 forms of life on planet Earth, plants and animals. 2,000 years later, the light microscope was invented, and we discovered tiny one-celled organisms like amoebas. Then the electron microscope was invented, and we were better able to characterize bacteria. Finally, in 1969, biologists recognized fungi as a separate category, and we've had at least 5 kingdoms of life ever since. In my video, Higher Quality May Mean Higher Risk, I talk about the potential downsides of consuming proteins from within our own kingdom because of the impact our fellow animal proteins can have on boosting our liver's production of a cancer-promoting hormone called IGF-1. In eating outside our kingdom, I talked about other potential advantages of preferably dipping into the plant and mushroom kingdoms for dinner, not only from a food safety perspective — we're more likely to get infected by animal pathogens than Dutch elm disease, but because of the potential for cross-reactivity between animal and human proteins. Our immune system is more likely to get confused between this and this, rather than this and that. And so there may be less potential to trigger an autoimmune reaction, like the degenerative brain disease I talked about in that other video. Same concept with animal proteins triggering inflammatory arthritis. In attacking some foreign animal meat proteins, some of our own similarly composed tissues may get caught in the crossfire. And it's not just proteins. If you remember the new 5GC story, there's this sialic acid in other animals that may cause inflammation in our arteries and help breast tumors and other human cancers grow. Well, now there's a new twist has been added to the story. The reason new GC triggers inflammation is because humans lost the ability to make it 2 million years ago, and so when our body's exposed to it through animal products, it's treated as a foreign invader. Well, there's another oligosaccharide called alpha-gal that we, chimps and apes, lost the ability to make 20 million years ago, but it's still made by a variety of animals, including many animals we eat. Anti-gal antibodies may be involved in a number of detrimental processes, which may result in allergic, autoimmune, and autoimmune-like diseases, such as autoimmune thyroid disorders. You can see higher levels in Crohn's disease victims. They react against about half of human breast tumors. And you can even find antibodies to this stuff in atherosclerotic plaques in people's necks. But those are all mostly speculative risks. We do know alpha-gal is a major obstacle to transplanting pig organs into people like kidneys, because our bodies reject alpha-gal as foreign. It's considered the major target for human anti-pig antibodies. It's interesting, if you look at those who abstain from pork for whatever reason, they have fewer swine-specific white cells in their bloodstream. Speculating that oral intake of pork could ferry swine molecules into the bloodstream via gut-infiltrating lymphocytes to prime the immune response. So we can have an allergic reaction to eating the kidneys too, but such severe meat allergies were considered rare until an unusual report surfaced. First described in 2009, the report included details on 24 cases of meat allergies triggered by tick bites. Within a year, it was obvious that the cases should be counted in the hundreds rather than dozens. By 2012, it was clear that there are thousands of cases across a large area of the southern and eastern U.S., and now present in several countries around the world. The Lone Star tick. So called because females have a white spot on their back. They're famous for causing Master's disease, a Lyme disease-like syndrome, also known as starry, southern tick-associated rash illness. But thanks to the Lone Star tick steadily expanding its range, it's not necessarily just so southern anymore. OK, but what is the relevance of tick bites to the production of anti-meat antibodies to alpha-gal, these allergic antibodies? Good question. What we know is you get bit by one of these ticks, and you can develop an allergy to meat. This appears to be the first example of a response to an external parasite giving rise to an important form of food allergy, either because there's something in the tick's saliva that's cross-reacting with the alpha-gal, or because the tick is like injecting you with animal allergens from its last meal. Tick bite-induced meat allergies are really unlike any other food allergy we know. The most interesting feature of the reaction may be the first symptom can occur hours after eating meat. Normally you have an allergic reaction to a bee sting or something, it happens within minutes. But with this, you could eat a piece of bacon for breakfast, and your throat doesn't start closing off until the afternoon, and so you blame lunch, or doctors just call it spontaneous or idiopathic anaphylaxis. Idiopathic is just doctor speak for we have no idea what the cause is. The delay is because the alpha-gal is thought to be absorbed along with the fat in the meat, given that the allergic reaction occurs 4 to 5 hours after meat ingestion, corresponding to the peak absorption time of the fat from the digestive tract. What makes it even more difficult to diagnose is that the majority of victims experience only occasional overt reactions despite regular meat consumption. Fattier meats like pork rinds may provoke episodes more consistently and severely, but still, it's not like it happens every time. And it's on the rise. 10 years ago, we didn't even know the thing existed, but now, in tick-ridden states, as many as 20% of the population have these anti-meat allergic antibodies, and more people are coming in affected. Though probably no more than 10% who test positive go on to experience hives or serious allergic reactions to meat. We're also seeing it more and more in kids. Researchers in Virginia finding it not uncommonly, though identification of these cases may not be straightforward. Unlike in adults, who frequently present with systemic reactions, the majority of children with this syndrome present with just skin manifestations, such as hives. It doesn't mean it's not serious. In fact, nearly half the kids end up in the ER, and about 1 in 12 need to be hospitalized. Up to a quarter of the population breaks out in hives at some point in their lives, but some children can be affected for weeks or months, and it can be triggered by infections, foods, drugs, parasites, autoimmune, but in a large subset of cases, we don't know what the trigger is, and so we call it chronic idiopathic urticaria. It's a common thing pediatricians see, and the only cure is avoiding and eliminating whatever is triggering it. But in 3/4 of the cases, we have no clue. But now we know that many children who've been diagnosed with mysterious hives or allergic reactions, and may have been specifically told that the reactions were not a result of food allergy, may have actually been suffering from anti-gal meat allergies. Given the serious nature of the reactions and the rising frequency of allergic swelling and hives across all age groups, this underscores the importance of identifying what's going on, and clearly physicians should keep this new diagnosis in mind. Allergies to meat might be more common than previously thought. 2% would mean millions of people, but just to put it in context, Americans are much more likely to suffer an anaphylactic reaction due to seafood. Tick bite or not, no matter where they live. A national survey of emergency rooms found shellfish was by far the most frequently implicated food, and unlike many other allergies, kids don't tend to outgrow fish and shellfish allergies. And many fish allergies are actually allergies not to the fish, but to worms within the fish, like Anisakis. Exposure to these parasites, living or dead, in fish is a widespread problem. In fact, you can even have an allergic reaction to the parasitic fish worm eating chickens that were fed on fish meal. This is one of the ways someone who's allergic to fish could get triggered by just eating chicken. Reminds me of pork-cat syndrome, where your mouth can get all itchy eating bacon in people with cat allergies, because of an allergic cross-reaction between cat skin and pig blood proteins. Anisakis worms are found particularly in cod, anchovies, and squid, and can also cause chronic hives and intractable chronic itching. Because of these worms, researchers recommend people stop eating all seafood sushi altogether, because besides inducing allergenic reactions, the worms may cause a leaky gut syndrome, which often is unrecognized and can predispose to other more important pathologies than just being itchy all over. Plants live the ultimate sedentary lifestyle. Most of us usually think of plants more as objects than as organisms, but because plants can't move, they've had to evolve a whole other way to escape threats to their well-being. Plants can sense and respond dynamically to all sorts of stimuli: chemical concentrations in the air, soil, and water, touch, motion, vibration, pathogens, predators, and of course light. And how do they respond? They respond biochemically. They manufacture from scratch a dizzying array of compounds to deal with specific threats. If we get too hot, we can move into the shade, but if plants get too hot, they're stuck. They are the shade. As a result, the complexity of the plant stress response humbles that of animals. Plants and their stress response have been evolving for almost 1 billion years, and in that time they've created a whole chemistry lab of protective substances, some of which can induce similarly protective responses in those that eat them. Why is it that the best grapes in terms of health benefit often result from relatively dry, sun-exposed, infertile soil? Similarly, drought-stressed strawberries have more antioxidants and phytonutrients. Indeed, commonly consumed foods like lettuce and fruits can be nutritionally enhanced by cold stress, light stress, water deficit, or nutrient deficit stress. Why is it that stressed plants are often the healthiest? We used to think it was just a matter of using the same tools to deal with the same problems. Studies suggest that plants and animals largely share the molecular pathways in order to respond to stress, so it's conceivable that a molecule produced in plants might also be effective in people. Plants have DNA. Humans have DNA. The UV rays and sunlight can damage the DNA in plants in the same way it can damage our DNA by creating free radicals. Plants figured out how to cook up all these complex antioxidants, and instead of just reinventing the wheel, animals can just expropriate those antioxidants from plants and commandeer them for the same purpose. We get attacked by bacteria, plants get attacked by bacteria. So, for example, when this fungus doesn't like getting muscled in on by bacteria, it creates a molecule called penicillin, provided free to us. What a nice guy, what a fungi. When plants get infected, they produce aspirin, which can come in handy when we get infected. Plants heal wounds. We heal wounds, actually using similar fatty acid signaling systems. It is increasingly evident that plants and animals differ less than we thought in terms of how we all respond, sharing elements of fatty acid, protein, steroidal, neurotransmitter, free radical, nitric oxide, and even plant growth hormone signaling systems. So in a sense, we're just opening up nature's drugstore when we pull out the CRISPR in our fridge. A whole new theory has arisen to explain the mystery as to why so many plant molecules interact with and modulate key regulators of our physiology in ways that are beneficial to our health, a theory called xenohormesis. I touched on hormesis in my liquid smoke video. Basically, it's the biological principle of no pain, no gain. Mild stresses like exercise can trigger a protective response that leads to strengthened defenses in the short term. But instead of exposing ourselves to the stressor to trigger our body's defenses and shore up protection against future stressors, why not just let plants take the hit? Let the plants get stressed, because incredibly, the stress response molecules in plants may activate the same protective responses in humans. Xenohormesis explains why environmentally stressed plants produce bioactive compounds that can confer stress resistance and survival benefits to animals that consume them. We can then piggyback off their sophisticated stress response. Indeed, the majority of known health beneficial effects of edible plants are attributable to the pharmacologically active substances of plants' stress response. Hormesis may be why dietary restriction can lead to lifespan extension. The mild stress placed upon the body by not eating enough may activate a wide variety of protective pathways within the body, a whole cascade ramping up anti-inflammatory and antioxidant defenses. Our body is preparing itself for the coming famine it thinks it's about to occur. So is there a way to exploit the benefits of dietary restriction to prevent chronic disease? Obviously, chronically restricting food intake is not a realistic health strategy for the majority of people. It's hard for most people to even cut food intake 10 or 20%, given the powerful evolutionary drive to eat. As a more feasible alternative, we may be able to activate dietary restriction-induced stress response pathways by other means, in other words, xenohormesis. If you starve plants, they do the same thing, activate preservation pathways. So let's let the plant face the adversity to create the molecules that trigger cell stress resistance, alter metabolism, and disease resistance, then just come along and appropriate them for the same uses in our own bodies. The reason phytonutrients like resveratrol in grapes, or curcumin in the spice turmeric, or ECGC in green tea are called dietary restriction mimetics is that they mimic the physiological effects of dietary restriction. And this may be no coincidence, because that's why the plants produce these compounds in the first place, to save their own green butts from scarcity. So instead of having to walk around starving all the time, thanks to xenohormesis, we may be able to let plants bear the brunt, and enable us to harness other species' hardships as a means to promote our own health. Since ancient times, Mother Nature has been a fertile source for drugs used to treat human disease. One such remedy is the spice turmeric, which has been used for at least 2,500 years. In light of the long and established experience with curcumin, the natural yellow pigment compound in turmeric, as a foodstuff and natural medicine, its low cost, proven disease-preventing and treating potential, and safety, curcumin is rapidly moving from the kitchen shelf toward the clinic. Curcumin has shown some promising effects against a wide range of diseases. So well, in fact, that curcumin appears to possess all the desirable features of a designed-from-scratch multi-purpose drug. If it's so safe and effective, why aren't more studies being done? Part of the delay is attributable to a U.S. patent granted in 1995 to researchers at the University of Mississippi Medical Center for curcumin's wound-healing properties that prevented its development as a therapeutic. In a landmark case, the Indian Council of Scientific and Industrial Research spent years arguing and finally proving that curcumin has been part of Indian traditional system of medicines for centuries, and so should be considered to be in the public domain. It's like patenting broccoli. The patent was finally overturned in 1997, a triumph for those trying to stop the misappropriation of traditional knowledge by multinational corporations. But if no one profits off it, how's anyone going to hear about it? Who's going to pay for the research? Given that public knowledge does not involve any intellectual property, drug companies are not interested in its commercialization. You can buy turmeric in any grocery store for pennies a dose. Unless there's intellectual property to make money, nobody will come forward, said a leading turmeric researcher. How's his research being funded? Well, although curcumin itself is no longer patentable, derivatives, formulations, delivery systems, and synthetic methods can be patented. So if you take some turmeric molecule and tweak it a little bit, then you can patent it for your investors. Unless phytonutrients can be converted into new chemical entities, for which more specific medical claims are possible, the development of these plants seems unlikely. Sure, they're extensively exploited as active ingredients of innumerable products on ill-regulated food supplement markets, but apart from this, progress through clinical trials remains sluggish. Such waste of resources on the way of transformation from renewable materials to high-tech, high-value products is deplorable, these research scientists write. Such wasted potential, since nobody profits. So maybe it'd be good if Frito-Lay did own the patent to broccoli. There's a reason we don't see Super Bowl ads on TV for vegetables. During the last decade, the drug industry has followed an assumption that a single drug hitting a single target was the rational way to design drugs. But we're learning that Mother Nature may be a bit more complicated than that. Strategies for targeting single genes or proteins ignore a very important fact that most, if not all, diseases involve a sophisticated network system. For example, one little family of immune molecules involves 50 different keys fitting in 20 different locks, often acting with redundancy, thus making selection of appropriate specific drug to antagonize one key or one lock may not work in the long run. A whole list of agents have been developed to target a specific molecule for the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease, for example, but they've all failed. That's why drug companies are now working on so-called promiscuous drugs that try to simultaneously affect multiple pathways. Meanwhile, since ancient times, natural agents derived from plants, fruits, vegetables, spices, beans, and grains, have been preferred as potential therapeutics for most chronic diseases, not only because of their safety, affordability, long-term use, but for their ability to target multiple cell signaling pathways. This promiscuous targeting of a disease cell's multiple bypass mechanisms is a therapeutic virtue. One example of a successful promiscuous plant-based drug is aspirin. It doesn't just target inflammation and offer pain relief, but can act as a blood thinner and help prevent preeclampsia, even some types of cancer. Curcumin is another hopeful. Aspirin is an extract of the willow tree bark. Curcumin is an extract of turmeric root. It's considered so anti-inflammatory that it may even work through the skin. A traditional use was to wrap sprains and injury with turmeric-soaked poultices, a use that actually continues to this day. So anti-inflammatory it can help counter the effects of mustard gas. Here's the response of spleen cells to an inflammatory cytokine, extinguished in the presence of curcumin. What about outside of a petri dish, though? Promising effects have been observed in patients with a variety of inflammatory diseases. And one of the reasons there may be such a wide margin of safety with turmeric, despite its powerful pharmacological effects, is that the same pathway promiscuity that may account for its effectiveness may also act synergistically to neutralize side effects. For example, turmeric has been traditionally used as a bronchodilator to open airways in conditions like asthma. Many of the adrenaline-like drugs that do the same thing can raise blood pressure, but the reason turmeric doesn't may be because it has different components with opposing activity, so it has calcium channel blocking effects that may actually lower blood pressure at the same time, and so side effects may cancel each other out. This strengthened promiscuity, though, is also a weakness. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has been reluctant to approve plant extracts, which by definition are composed of mixtures of different compounds. So it's like a catch-22. One drug, one chemical, one mechanism of action, and you can patent it, get FDA approval, make $1 billion, but it may just not work very well. On the other hand, there might be a safe natural alternative that works better, but industry and the government may not be interested. However, there is hope on the horizon. Remember this video? The FDA approved a green tea ointment as a prescription drug for the treatment of genital warts, making it the first prescription plant approved in the United States. So have drug companies abandoned their model and started pouring money into plants? No. Having discovered that so-called magic bullets have been largely unsuccessful, they just propose creating non-selective drugs. Instead of magic bullets, in effect, magic shotguns. Probably the least controversial advice in all of nutrition is eat more fruits and vegetables, which is to say eat more plants, since the term vegetable just basically means all parts of plants that aren't fruit. Eat more fruits and vegetables if for no other reason than to live longer, but only recently did we learn how much longer. The first study to follow people over time to evaluate a dose-response curve between fruit and vegetable consumption and mortality. Compared to those eating 5 servings of fruits and veggies a day, those only eating 4 lose a month off their lifespan. Only 3 servings lose 3 months. Then we start going off the cliff. 2 servings a day, we live 7 months shorter. 1 serving, practically a year and a half. 2 years gone at half serving a day, and then 3 years of our lives down the drain. Just a single serving of fruit, just like 1 apple, could mean a 19-month difference between life and death. And 1 daily salad could mean years more time on this planet. This study mostly looked at people in their 50s and 60s. Is it too late by our 70s? No. Women in their 70s with the most carotenoid phytonutrients in their bloodstream were twice as likely to survive 5 years than those with the lowest, doubling one's likelihood of survival just eating some more fruits and vegetables. In this study out of Taiwan, spending just 50 cents a day on fruits or vegetables appears to buy us about a 10% drop in mortality. That's quite a bargain. Imagine if there was a drug that, without side effects, could lower our risk of death 10%. How much do you think drug companies would charge? Probably more than 50 cents.